Welcome everyone from a very beautiful Johannesburg and voting day, local government in South Africa. So I hope people have come back, they've done the necessary, and thank you so much for taking time out to join us on what we think has been a very exciting conversation. For us and Sedibeng, who I will introduce shortly, we've sat many times with different friends and different constellations and discussed this topic. So we thought, why don't we actually formalize this and just hear how people are dealing with this issue? Is it even a thing? So my name is Mothomang Diaho, founder of Spiral Aloe Health and Wellness. And I would like to introduce to you a friend, a mother, a colleague, and all sorts of very beautiful things in between, Sedibeng Ngubane. Thank you very much, Sedibeng, for joining us and for agreeing to share your experiences in this very exciting topic. Yes. So before we get into the conversation, an hour looks long, but I know it's very short once we get into the conversation. Before I start, I thought I would start with contextualizing this thing about sandwich. Is it even a thing? So this is us and me and you and a lot of us in this age group, which we will keep secret for now. It's simply put, people supporting either the parents and their children at the same time. So we are in the middle, the sandwich. So the situation right now globally, let me start with the West. I think it's a thing that generation between 40 years of age to about 60 are actually increasingly supporting their parents financially and emotionally. And then the adult children who are staying at home. But I think we've seen that trend here as well, isn't it? In the East, they're a little bit, the sandwiches are a little bit younger. They're about 30 to 35 years of age, and it's quite a squeeze, right? But I wanted to also put into this conversation our own situation, which is quite peculiar, which one has met in many ways. We've talked in conversations, in communities and everywhere. What they call the triple decker. And this is grandparents supporting their own grandchildren. You know this. We've seen it many, many times. And when research and a few questions are thrown around in different parts of the world, people are actually reporting that 50% say their relationships have actually improved. You know, the squeeze. They've actually seen greater collaboration and a beautiful thing happening. But we also have heard a negative 35% of people saying it's actually made their relationships with their relatives worse. So I think this is the gist of what it is that we're trying to get. Because again, if you come back to the middle, the squeezed ones, it has a hell of a lot of impact health-wise, because this is why it's about health and wellness, isn't it? And it manifests in so many ways. Professionally, you see people coming in because they're stressed out, they don't know how to cope, primarily because the finances are just not stretching enough between and across these generations. But I think much, much more importantly for me is this issue of the emotional support and the impact on the one in the middle. So the carer in this instance. So if 83% of people of the squeezed generation specifically say that this has really increasingly, and we're not talking about COVID, but obviously COVID has made it worse. So 83% of people have actually said that it's actually made their relationship in the home worse. So there are all the statistics flying around. They're all lived experiences. We know in certain cultures, this is the norm. In our own culture, supporting our own parents has been the norm. But we are moving, we've become internal migrants, and this has shifted dynamics in the home a little bit. So I would like to just set the scene like this, ask you to come in and share what your experiences and your lived experiences with this very interesting topic has been. And as we do that, really, I would like to invite people to share their experiences, because I think it's increasingly going to be a thing. So Sedibeng.
Thank you, Mutu, for inviting me to this. I think, you and I and other friends have talked about this for a long time. I just lost my mother, as you know, about a month ago. And it was, she's just someone that I was taking care of. And this has been going on. My father passed away 20 years ago. And since he left, I knew that I had to take care of my mother. It was just something that I've always known, from the point of moving her from the house that she lived in, which was far away from me. And I felt that it would be easier if she was close to me. So I literally had to buy a house and bring her close to me so that I can take better care of her. And for a long time, I mean, she was independent. She could drive, take herself to the salon, go to do her own groceries. And she had a bit of money in the form of what do they call this that you get at a certain age?
Pension money.
Pension, yes. And she had a bit of pension money, which was good. So it wasn't that heavy, honestly, except for the occasional when she wants to go away with the girls and she would say, my friends are going on a cruise. Can you book for me? I'd like to go. So those little things. But then over time, in fact, in the past 4 years, she stopped driving. So which meant that now I have to now take her places, and I'm one of two. So between my brother and I, we had to agree who's doing the church, who's doing the clinic, who's doing the shopping, and all that. Not taking away from the fact that I'm a wife, I'm a mother. So I have my own children to deal with and my husband, and a career, So I just found that initially it wasn't that bad, but it got, over time, it just got a bit heavy. And, emotionally, it's been quite draining. And that's why it's good to have the type of, friends around you that you can talk to about this. And that's why we've had so many conversations about it as well, The past year has been particularly hard because I've literally had to move my mother. I had to move my mother into my home to take care of her, So it just made, I'm not going to call it a burden, but I'm just going to say it made the load a little heavier than initially anticipated. So juggling all of that and trying to keep my marriage together in the process, and I just found it quite taxing. And also, even though two of my children are a little older, so they are on their own, but children will always be children. So they come home and they expect emotional assistance, They want to come home and discuss certain things. And then every now and again, their finances are not so good. And I've grown significantly in the process. I've grown. I've had time to do a lot of reflection to say, what could I have done differently? And what can I do differently now? And unfortunately, I'm at the age where it's not easy for me to get up and start a new career, So you start looking at, did I save enough money? Am I going to put my children through this as well? Will they support me the same way that I have supported my mother? So there are those fears. And every time I talk to people, they say they've watched how you took care of your mother. They probably will do the same, but is it guaranteed? I don't know, So these are some of the discussions that I've had with people, with friends, and I'm lucky to have a huge support system through friends and relatives. But it's something that is at the back of my mind all the time. So I'm literally stuck in the middle.
Yeah. Thank you, Sedi, and I know we were all there when you walked through a very long time with your mother's illness, and then really I must say that I think you showed strength that most people possibly would have really cranked, and I was amazed by how you went through that in the middle of all of this. I'd like to pick up on something you said, two things you said about your mom, because I would like to stay with that generation that is being supported. How do you think she was going through, what was going through her as she was increasingly an extremely independent woman, you've told me? How do you think she was dealing with this transition of now having to increasingly depend on you? So now she couldn't drive. Secondly, you do say that finances were not the biggest of the problem, but she was increasingly having to rely on you. Then you mentioned there's only two of you. In some of the research, it actually picks this up as an issue that with the nuclear families becoming smaller and smaller, that becomes an issue. So if you come from a big family like mine of 7, there's almost a shared responsibility.
Yeah.
And you come, I know, from a family of 2 in a sense. How was that for you? One, for you with the sort of the immediate support of family and siblings, but two, what was going on, do you think, with your mom as she was losing, I would say, control and handing over to you?
I must say that we actually did talk about it. We had a conversation about it, and she did mention that it was depressing because suddenly she cannot do the things that she wants to do when she wants to do them. Because obviously it meant finding time in my diary. You know, she has to consult me and say, you know, I'd like to go and buy groceries. So between my brother and I, we had to make a plan. Are you free on Wednesday? No, you can't make it. I'll make it. I'll take her, you know. So taking away that independence from her was depressing for her. COVID didn't help, you know. At least she had a community through her church that she depended on a lot for emotional support. So with COVID, she couldn't go to church anymore. It basically meant that staying at home and depending on me and my brother. And you know, men are not exactly like us. You know, my brother would come in and help wherever he can. He would literally come in and say, what are we doing today? Okay, get into the car, let's go. You know, go and buy that, bring her back, drop her off and go. You know, whereas with me, it meant sitting down and having a cup of coffee as part of the outing, finding out where she is, what does she need to do. So that, and not being able to see her friends the way she used to, you know, friends were now a phone call away, which was not exactly the same thing. So that for her was a big problem. And I could see towards the end, she really was starting to get quite depressed. In fact, we put her on antidepressants precisely because she felt that she had lost her support system. And she did say that I hate the fact that I'm dependent on you, you know, particularly because I have to find time in your life for me to be able to get the things that I want. So that it also made me think, I mean, how would I feel? Because I've been independent for a long time. To now suddenly have to wait for my children to come and fetch me for me to do the things that I would normally do on my own. So that was a big problem. It was depressing and it was not nice to watch, quite honestly. And also, as I say, I'm one of 2. Having a brother, you know, is not exactly the same as having a sister, you know. There's certain things that I just couldn't share with him. And he really pulled his weight as much as he possibly could. But I was also closer to my mother, 10 minutes away. So she would call me and say, I need this. And I'd get into the car and come and go to see her. Whereas with my brother, because it's slightly, you know, a little further away, he would have to make time to come through. If I get a call at 10 o'clock in the evening because the lights have gone off, it meant getting into the car and going to see why her lights are off or why her TV is not changing channels, you know. As mundane as that sounded, but it was also important to realize that when she can't switch channels, it's stressful for her. For me, it might not, because I could just sit and read a book. Or
a mundane thing like that you take for granted, right?
That you take for granted, but it was very important to her.
Yeah.
It meant that I literally had to get into the car, drive 10 minutes, go and check and see why she can't change channels, because it's important to her right now, you know. So it also changed our relationship, in the sense that, you know, things that I took for granted, I realized that I needed to stop and think about where she is and fill that gap, and not say, oh, but I'll do it tomorrow, you know, because she needed it done then. And if I say, can I do it tomorrow? And she says, yes, it's fine, you can do it tomorrow. Then it's fine, I can do it the following day. But if she says, no, but I wanted to watch this now, it meant I need to stop and go and do that. It also meant centering myself and not getting irritated, you know?
Yeah. Because I believe they get a little bit more irritable very easily as they grow older. I know I have an 88-year-old mother. Don't suggest she does something she doesn't like. She will give it straight back to you. So
yes. Yeah.
I want to stay with you a little bit. You talked about contracts. Well, you didn't put it exactly like that, but one of the things that people talk about is the many different types of contracts that have to be signed, sort of contracts between yourself and your husband, contracts between yourself and your household. But also the other important contract I think we haven't yet spoken about is the ladies that look after our moms. Yes. Because all those dynamics, you almost have this contractual understandings that suddenly shift because she's increasingly becoming dependent on not only her, but yourself and everybody else around you. Can you share some of those contracts that you found? You mentioned some of them. You actually had to sit down and say, this will be done now this way and all of that, mainly to support yourself.
Yes. Look, I mean, you talk about, you know, we you know, and I think generally a lot of people do that. When your mother is unable to do things herself, and you can't necessarily, you know, because I needed to bargain. You know, there was a lot of bargaining with myself, with my family. Do I bring my mother into my home right now? At the time, no, because I also felt that maybe it's unfair on my husband, you know, to bring my mother into my home, especially when she was still able to do certain things. And to my children, so they're able to spend time with me as well, you know. So I had to bargain with myself and say, at what point do I now bring her into my home? But in the meantime, bring in a caregiver, someone who would take care of her in her home, make sure her home is clean, make sure she's fed, make sure she's also of good health, you know, and someone who will also pick up the phone and say, she hasn't woken up today, you know, so I don't think she's in a good space. And then I'll call and say, are you okay? I understand you're still in bed. And she says, who says I can't stay in my bed today, you know? But I also understanding that a helper will not have the power that I will have over her. You know, a helper will only go that far and not beyond that. Whereas when I walk in and then I say, what's happening? You know, and she said, no, I've got a bit of a headache or I've got this. So it is managing her, managing her helper, managing my own household, you know, managing my helper, my children, you know, and having the type of discussion with my husband to say, you know where we are. As much as I'd like to be sitting here and watching TV with you, but I've got to dash and go to my mother and see what's happening. I mean, Sunday was a given. Sunday was the day that I went and sat with my mother for half the day. You know, and traditionally Sundays was our family day where we sat together as a family. So I'd go and spend the morning with my mother. But it's also, I couldn't take for granted that my husband understands. I needed to sit down with him and explain to him that we are now at the point where she needs to be able, I need to sit down with her for half a day, find out where she is, what's going through her mind, what does she want to do, what works for her, what doesn't work for her. And she got to the point where she was like a child, and I needed to make those decisions on her behalf. You know, so the juggling was quite, you know, it had its moments of being quite stressful. But I also needed to, one of the things that helped me through this transition was to say, this is not permanent.
Yeah.
It will come to an end at some point.
Yeah. This too shall pass, yes.
It shall
Yes.
pass. But between now and the time that it passes, how do I best manage it in a way that everybody is comfortable?
Sure.
Particularly for my mother, because she was older and you don't know how many more Christmases you have with her, right? So you want to make those Christmases and those moments to matter a lot more for her than for us. Yeah. So yes, it just really, and every day was different. I must be honest. I couldn't say for a fact that this is how we're handling things and this is how we're going to be handling them every day. So it was always taking the day at a time.
Yeah. You talk about her sort of articulating the fact that she really did enjoy this because she was feeling that she's dependent on you.
Yes.
There's the upside to this. Did she articulate ever the joy of being you were moving closer and closer together? And I think you had the privilege, one, of space. You were very close to your mom's house, which some people don't have. And you mentioned it earlier that because she was able, she had her own finances. That wasn't too much of a stress. But was she ever able to articulate the joy of having you so often around her or her grandchildren with this change in state?
So it also depended on where we are for the day. Because I got that more from, after she passed away and I had visits from the women at her church and her friends. It was only then that I realized that my mother appreciated me more than I knew. Because everybody was saying, oh my goodness, how you took care of your mother and how she talked about you all the time and this and that. And I don't know, I think it's also a generational thing. Our mothers.
It is.
You don't really want to make her feel like she's the best thing since sliced bread. So she would criticize me every now and again. Says, we should come a bit more, or if only you could do this or that. But then she would tell people around me that, oh, my daughter, she's amazing. She takes care of me. She does,
Yes.
And only when she was really sick towards the end, and I said to her, I asked her, were you happy with the way that I took care of you? Do you think I could have done anything differently? And she said, I could never have asked for anything more. It warmed my heart, but it was right towards the end. And I suppose I got it right. It's better than not ever having been told that. So that meant a lot to me. It also meant that all my efforts were being realized. And I didn't do it out of a sense of obligation.
Sure.
I did it because it felt right. It felt like it was the right thing to do. And I knew I had to do it. And I never really overthought it. I never put too much pressure on myself to do it as well. It felt natural. It just felt like this is what you do for your mother. Not to repay her for all the things that she's done for you.
No.
But she's loved you, right? And you've also loved her, and you are who you are today because of her. So it really felt like it was the right thing to do. So I did it out of love, and out of service, because I felt that I needed to serve her in the best way that I possibly could. And that's what I did.
Yeah, again, it's just watching you through this process that there was almost a sense of having accomplished something and being settled in the decisions that you made. So one of the other discussions we've had around this, broadly even, is this aspect of looking after our Asian parents. How much do you think culture plays a role?
Okay.
Because we battled with, remember the tension we talked about Do we move our parents into institutional care? Do you look after them at home? And it's a big thing. It's a very, very big thing. And I'm aware that there are other cultures possibly where that possibly is not even a discussion at all.
Yeah. I just think that culturally, you and I come from the same type of background. So, and you come from a big family. I don't. But traditionally, there would be a family home, right?
Yeah.
Everybody grows up there. And there are normally some people who are left behind, whether it's other siblings who never got married or came back home, and there'd be grandchildren. So there would always be people around. And unfortunately for me, because I was, being one of two, we both got married. So we moved away from home. And so she lived with her husband until he passed. So after he passed away, there really was, she was far from me. And I just couldn't bear to know it. There were a few instances when she would call and say, I think there's someone outside the house, and my husband and I would get into the car, drive. It would take us about 20 minutes to get there. We walk around the house and there's no one. And, I remember the one evening when my husband said, let's just pack a bag and take you home with us. So that's when I realized that she'd be better off close to me. But culturally as well, she said she doesn't want to live with a son-in-law.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
Her pride wouldn't allow her. She said, I can't live with my son-in-law. And I also felt that it wasn't a discussion that I had had with my husband initially when we got married, that at some point my mother will come and live with us, right? So I also felt that it's not something that I could just spring on him. And at the time, she was independent enough to be able to live close to us, but not necessarily in our home. And traditionally, was as well in the Zulu culture, the mother-in-law always lives with her son, Nomakoti.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And my feeling was, my mother's not going to live with my sister-in-law. She's my mother. So we discussed this. We sat and discussed it with my sister-in-law, and she says, actually, I don't mind taking care of Mawe, but if you insist. And I said, no, let me move her close to me for now because she's relatively independent. It was only when I think we didn't anticipate that she would be dependent, that
Sure.
So when it happened, we then looked at a number of possibilities, including moving her to a retirement village. So we had this discussion with her, retirement village, then you'd have other people your age, you'd have company, there'll be things to do, that trips. And she was not sold on the idea, but she said, okay, let me see what happens. So we organized a few appointments and took her to 3 retirement villages. And I made sure those are retirement villages that had other Black elderly people. So she doesn't feel like, this is a white setting, So, and we said, you see, this is what they do. They do sewing, they do knitting every now and again. They play this, they do that. So you'll always have company. So we did this tour. And she came home and she said, yeah, no, I see it. That very same evening, I got a call from her helper. She's not well. Took her to hospital. Her blood pressure had gone sky high. They had to stabilize her. It took about 5 days. On day 5, the doctor called us and said, look, I had a chat with her because I was trying to find out why she's at this point. And she says, please don't ever bring up the discussion of a retirement village again.
Yeah.
And that was it. End of story.
Yeah.
So she continued to live on her own with her helper until we got to the point where she was in and out of hospital too often. And my husband said, no, we're not going to do this to her.
Yeah.
Let's bring her in. Let's bring her home. Let her live with us. But also that I was grateful that he's the one who offered, that I didn't have to say to him, oh, can we have a discussion about this? He said, no, she's my mother too,
Sure.
And watching her go in and out of hospital and being, I think it's time we brought her in.
Sure.
It had its positives because those last few months, I used to wake up every morning, sit with her in bed with her coffee. The time when she didn't want to eat, I was the one who was feeding her. The grandchildren were coming in and out, and she loved that. There was a buzz in the house. People were coming in and out, and she was seeing her grandchildren. She was seeing her friends. I even invited her friends, and I said, listen, if you can come and just have tea with her. So she loved that. So I must say that those last few months were quite fulfilling for me, just watching her happy and in my space every day. Look, it had its own challenges as well, because it meant at the time when she couldn't turn herself in the middle of the night, it meant I had to wake up from my bed, go across to her bedroom, and turn her, so that she doesn't sleep in the same position all night. But
that's how I think, standing outside, looking in and listening to you, one experiences this, that it was just the most beautiful time with your mom, and I think with herself, going out with so much around her at the time. And I just wanted to say earlier, we have to acknowledge the fact that we're talking about a context where there wasn't a lot of stress in terms of too much stress with the finances in that sense. The way I know, but I'm just saying generally speaking, because if you hop out into the rest of the communities that we come from generally, extended families, all of that, it is actually because in fact here, what we're talking about is choice. When you have choice, then you have the latitude to make these decisions. But in some instances, and how this topic has come up, if you remember, is because people just are not coping, because the resources available to make those choices and the choices available are just not there. People still live in the same home that they grew up in. People bring the new part of the family, and it just gets worse and worse. And sometimes the sandwich, the squeezed one, becomes the one that actually, in some instances, you're the only one that is the breadwinner, as it were. And you can imagine the immense type of stress that this and I think I could safely say that it is a very common thing, our type of a sandwich generation. So I think listening to you now, you almost also acknowledge how lovely this was, but also the contracts that you had around you were prepared. You engaged your husband a lot about that. That's why I think, yes, is that he was able to make this decision that quickly. There was a lot of discussion. And I'm wondering whether, in terms of lessons to take away, that's one of the major ones, that as we acknowledge the fact that we are, at our age, sandwiched between supporting our children and our parents, we need to acknowledge the fact that we are here. This is a real thing. We're going to have to support them and start engaging the contracts and talking about it. So that for me is what I take away from this. Now, we're talking about a sandwich generation, which means there's the other side of the sandwich, right? So, and I'm not even sure what my situation of the sandwich is. I'm not sure whether I'm actually living with my children or they don't live with me. They come in and out. It's almost like a fluid situation, but they're there. Unlike clearly, when I left home. There was no, and I know that this is unusual, but at 16, I left to go study, and that's all it. And I was out. And that was the same with my siblings. When they left home, they left. So here we are. I think I could safely say your generation and mine, and the friends around us and our colleagues, we pretty much are supporting our children, right?
Absolutely.
Talk a little bit about that, and how's that for you?
So, and I just can I just acknowledge just how privileged we are. And I think it's important to acknowledge that, because we're able to talk like this from a position of being able to bring our mothers in and, and taking them away as and when we can. But also, my children don't, I grew up, as soon as I finished university, right? My father said, you work now, right? Leave. Get out of my house. right? And so that option was not there for me. I used to then go and visit on a Saturday, go and see them,
Sure.
knowing that I'm there for a few hours and then I leave. I watch my children. I mean, they lived with me until they were in their 20s, and then they gingerly moved out. But they haven't really moved out because they're here most of the time. They come back from work and they come and have dinner here, you know. Weekends they're here. I mean, you know, they come and go as they wish. When they don't have money, we're a phone call away. Mom, I don't have money. You know, I need to go. Can I have some money? Or they come here and they eat dinner, and you see them coming in like 3-4 days in a row. Then you know they don't have money to buy their
and
own
you don't
food.
ask.
You don't ask.
Yeah.
And they come in, and then when they ask, where are we going in December? And they say, what do you mean? You guys are now independent. You can't. And they say, no, just wanted to check if you guys are going to do. Can we go with you? You know. So and you know that even though they are gone, they're not really gone. And they live quite close to us, so they can pop in anytime. Not only that, I don't remember calling my mother for advice on career or a relationship that's not going as well as it's supposed to, or I'm depressed and therefore I want to come and cuddle and sit. I never had that privilege. My children do. And they know that I'm there for them all the time. So they might not be under my roof 24/7, but they are under my roof half the week. You know, they come and they sit here until late, and then you know that they are going to sleep here. You know, so I think they are very fortunate to have the type of relationship that they have with us, because we never had that privilege. But I was also quite clear that my relationship with my children is going to be a lot more fluid than my relationship with my mother was. I nurtured that relationship. They sometimes do and say things that I don't necessarily agree with, but I watch them and I think, you know what? It's their time. This is what this generation does. We never did that. And try and understand where they're coming from. So, so we're between, we've always been between being old-fashioned because we need to take care of our mothers and this is what they understand, and also being new gen, because we also need to be able to fit into their spaces and sit with them and chat about things that are common and nurture the type of relationship. I'm not even sure if we're doing the right thing, but we are, right?
Yeah.
We're doing this because I want to have a different relationship with my children when I get to 80 than I had with my mother.
Sure.
And I'm hoping that as we do the things that we do, we are bridging that gap, that generation.
So let me read something from one of the articles I read. And it's amazing that you say that, and I'll actually just read it out. Most middle-aged parents with grown children say their relationship with their children is different from the relationship they had with their own parents at a comparable age. 50% say the relationship is much closer, while 12% say it's less close, and 37% say it's just about the same. So I was triggered by what you said about you made a very intentional decision to say, I would like to have a much closer relationship with my children than we I know we've talked about this because both of us come out of, at least the mothers, teachers. And the sort of like, there was a no-nonsense type of parenting, oh, you did well today, just go off and finish off there was no this overly concentration on accolades and everything. You just got on with the thing. And I think we've come out not expecting to be acknowledged for anything good. And I know this for a fact because I talk to a lot of parents my age and yourselves, but you said something about, well, I'm not sure if that's a bad thing. I'm not sure if that's a good thing. But this discussion around the children that we are now having to support has two I think, has two sides to it. The one side is their relationship, the nurturing relationship with us or not. But the other things is the question that is being increasingly raised in the sandwich generation discussion. They seem to be at a slower pace of development, career-wise, socially, relationships, all of them, than we were when we were their age. So what do you think about that? Because, you know, that's another side of the sandwich, right?
Yes. Look, I mean, you know, and I think that our generation, I mean, I've got a lot of lady friends that we have these discussions about. We watch our children and it's always a question mark, are we doing this right? I mean, no child comes with a manual, unfortunately. But there's always that thing that, so my mother was very cool. So, I mean, it was a thing. So the hugging and the kissing that we do with our children never happened with my mother. And if I did well, I'll just be told, oh, that's good. And that's about it. You know, as you say, with our children, it's like, oh my goodness, this is fantastic. You know, there's still room for improvement, but this is great and all that. Because we are also aware that we've got some psychological problems that we are dealing with. And we are not necessarily sure where they come from. And as we raise our children, we want them to have less psychological pressures than we are having, right? So, sorry, this is my daughter now calling. So, we are constantly trying to make sure that they are in a better space psychologically. But we also worry that we might have just overcompensated for our own shortcomings or for the way that we were raised, which we didn't think that maybe was good enough. But what is good enough? I don't know. So we tend to fan over them. We tend to want the best for them. We tend to expose them to a lot more. You know, someone might say we even throw money at them to make the problem go away. I don't know. But we are more aware that loving your child openly and unconditionally and just showing it in as much as you possibly can will probably make her a better person than withholding that love. That said, our children are, you would live in a small house and you have to move out, right? And as soon as you move out, that bedroom is given to somebody else. Our children know that their bedrooms are still here. So they can come home.
Yeah.
Because
I wasn't going to say what I was going to say. It is my bedroom. There's a whole thing around it's my bedroom. It's my
bedroom. Yes. So I sometimes worry that it doesn't give them they're not as resilient as we are. But are we really resilient? Or are we damaged from having to be so strong and so, to a point that I find that they share openly, even emotionally. They are able to talk more openly.
Yeah.
They are able to solicit advice more openly than we did. Sure. We are the generation that tries to solve things ourselves first. And if it doesn't work out, then you start thinking, sure, let me talk to a friend or let me go for counseling. Even that is not necessarily our thing. Whereas our children just solicit advice openly. They come and sit with you and say, this is my problem. And if they don't think you're giving them that, they go for therapy. I mean, our children are constantly in therapy.
Yeah.
I'm also not sure if you're not over, if it's
not
not
handing off the crutches and then they become permanent instead of just being a transitional.
Yes. So it does worry me that is this really how it's supposed to be? But I'm also comfortable with the fact that I know that I'm doing the best that I can. And I have shared this with my children openly, whereas with my mother, she never said, listen, I'm doing the best that I can, And I think So we tend to take them more into our confidence, and they also take us into their confidence. And they've become our friends. Whereas our mothers were our mothers, they were not our friends. It's only now when you're much older and you can say to her, no, mom, actually, this is the reason why I think that, you know.
Sure.
Whereas with our children have had that over, you know, from when they were young. They've always been bold. They've always known what they wanted. And we have granted them that they are heard and seen, whereas we were just seen.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
You
I
know?
mean, it was articulated in the home. Yeah.
Yes, you know. So
no gray areas here.
exactly. And when we grew up, I mean, you only had so many careers that you could pursue, and that's what your parents expected, and that's it. Whereas our children, one of them is an artist. He loves art. And I've said, if that's what you want to do, that's fine, you know.
Sure.
And the one that I thought was bright, and we thought she was going to be an engineer, and she just said, I want to do politics, and then she's not there anymore. She wants to do this, and you know. And I'm always saying, okay, so what do you want to do next? We never had that privilege. You had to go to school, get out of the house, start a career, do your thing, live your life.
So with all of that, I mean, similarly, we're in the middle. We do all of this from a very good place, and we articulate it. We tell them. So how long our parents, if everything goes according to plan and nature, will most likely pass on before we do, right? But our children are with us for much longer if everything goes to normal plan. So how long are we in the sandwich for our children?
I actually think that we are going to be, look, our parents will, as you say, will pass on. I mean, my parents have passed on. It's thrown me out of kilter a bit, because I'm like, now, so what now? You know? So now I have to take care of my children, right? But my sense is that I see myself extending this to my grandchildren as well, because I see my children coming home and saying, I don't know how to do this, please take it. You know, it might be for a little while, it might be for longer, but I see this continuing. And I don't know if you should be comfortable with it, or is this time to say to them, actually, get on with it now. You know, you need to get on with it, because we're not here forever.
Yeah, because this is a conversation and it is between you and me. I'm very aware of the cultural aspect to this, and I have committed to inviting other people from other cultures to unpack this. Because ultimately everybody has a slightly different culture. There are cultural contexts. In some cultures, actually, the home is so big, you have 4 generations living in one roof, and nobody frowns upon it. I mean, I met a pediatrician whose mother was the matriarch, and it was very well understood. But also there's an element of that where the makoti who comes into that situation has different experiences with those contractual relationships. And this is a very fascinating thing. But I see that Ntabi has raised somebody on the chat about how do we prepare of the younger generation, the importance of speaking about the expectations of them ultimately becoming the sandwich. And some of those, obviously, as you know, Sedi, we have extended family. They've already migrated into being the sandwich. We're not talking about COVID today, but what happens is that children, this children that were being supported, they get a job, they marry and all of that, and before they know it, their parents almost flip and become the ones that are caring for them, or they have to care for them. They have their own children, and of course it's younger children, is a different dynamic. So the one conversation as we sort of wind down is this question raised here, and we've raised it in other conversations. how do we get to talk to our children who come from a different context, as we have discussed? How do we actually start having an understanding about the expectations of us? I mean, we laugh about, oh, they won't even come and visit me. You know, this, like, they'll just send you money and says, you know, we'll just Uber you to the hospital. Do you understand what I'm saying? Are these the children that will Uber you to the hospital and pay for your medical? But if not, how do we get them to start that discussion? Because they don't come from 7 sibling families. They're either the one or there's only 2. And you know the dynamic around that as well. They're getting busy with their own lives. Yeah. And
so,
I think there's a question there. Maybe let's read it for yourself so that we can address it. Yes.
Do you want to read this question out, Muthu?
No, you can go ahead from, you know.
Okay. So here it says, thank you for speaking on becoming more present when you speak about support and how we do this within the context of these relationships. Being of the younger generation, how important is it for us to speak about expectations of the transition to caring for our parents who have so lovingly and openly nurtured us and who continue to do so?
Yeah.
Look, I think that we've had the privilege of being able to talk to each other about this. And I think that it is important that we open a discussion, you know, give them the platform for them to discuss. You know, they've watched us take care of our mothers, to say, do they see themselves do this? And if not, how do they think they can do it differently? Because we've also talked about, hey, because our children, you know, as you say, we don't see them doing what we did for our mothers. Does this mean we end up in retirement villages? I've made peace with the fact that that's probably where I'm going, because I don't see my children saying, "Mom, come and live with me." You know,
they might surprise you though.
They might. But we don't know. And I think, you know, for us it's different because we grew up seeing this happen.
Yeah.
Right? And we come from a community where we all lived together. And the entire community, you knew, two houses down, Gogo Mangmang lived with the grandchildren and that house, that type of thing. Whereas now we are in a complete, you know, in these suburbs, we are mixed. Our children have had a different education from ours. So they've had a completely different exposure. And they've seen, as you say, they've seen families where it's 4 generations, and then they've seen nuclear families with the elderly being in rural communities that they visit once a year at the end of the year for Christmas, you know. And it should be interesting to actually get their take on how they see themselves. Look, I think that actually when the time comes, you step up, right?
Yeah, I think when the time comes, you step up. Yes.
Yeah. I think that's the thing. I mean, I think that they will surprise us. I think they will step up. They will show up like we did.
But don't you think? Yeah, I actually want to challenge you on this. About it might be that we should stop threatening to have these intergenerational discussions and actually do them. Because quite frankly, we're having them in small spaces, but open it up and deal with the expectations and hear from the other side. Because it's one thing to just think people will do this by default because they've just done it happen. But one of the things the article mentions is increasingly, I live 4 hours away from my mom and none of us are with her. She has a whole lot of 7 children, none of them. We literally have to plan to visit, you understand? So this is going to be the situation. So not only are we away from our mom, but in other instances, there'll be 2-3 plane flights from you. And this is a reality we need to start talking about. What happens in that situation, right? But I'd also like to pose this, that the world seems to be going back to there are cultures that are set up to minimize this increase in social isolation. And you know, there are places that are beginning to talk more about wellness villages and things like that. What are they actually talking about? it is nothing but to recreate community. It is to recreate community, the intergenerational experience, people being close by. Whatever permutation of this relationship we're talking about, I would propose that we actually need to start getting on with it. Because I think some of the manifestations of mental illness, mental diseases that we see are truly related to the isolation that we are increasingly become. It's not the only thing, but I would really like to hear this conversation as a platform of young children. Because I'm sure they talk about this, talking about what's the future for them in this and how do they see it pan out.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think that a more robust engagement is important. I think that we need to stop thinking that things will fall into place, because sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. Yeah. And I think discussions of that nature give everyone a platform to then start also thinking about it. Because it's one thing to say, I've seen it done, but it actually forces them to start saying, so how do I want to see it happen for me? You know, sure. And reflection and listening to others and seeing what our other cultures are doing. Because quite honestly, let's not lie to ourselves. We've moved from where we were 20 years ago, without a doubt. So our children, they see things very differently. And until we have those discussions to say, this is what's traditionally happened, where do you see yourselves fitting in and how do you want to see it happen? Because actually they could help us as well to say, Mom, I love you very much, yeah? And quite honestly, I'm happy to do this, that, and that. So we also start planning.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? It's not too late. It's not too late for us to start planning that what happens to us in the next 15, 20 years, you know? So I think it is, I agree with you that I think that we need to start having platforms where we have bigger engagements around this issue and a whole lot of other issues, you know? I think it is important.
Yeah. We've got 4 minutes, but I'm going to say that you are going away with your daughters this coming week. Again, it's a privilege that most people don't have, right? It's not only a privilege, but you come from a space where you tackle problems head on. You're very aware of, the train coming. I've watched you many years, but not a lot of people do. I think you sort of feel caught. You don't know what to do. So in this final 3 minutes, how do people get help? I mean, how do they start getting and accessing help? How do they do this? And there's a lot in there because some of them is also financial. They just want to study, but they can't because, etc., etc., etc.
Yeah.
What's the call for help? What's the call to action?
You know, my thing is I do a lot of reflecting, and I've always been someone who dabbles in different things, you know, especially spiritual things. I mean, I practice Buddhism. I do a lot of quiet time. I also listen. I listen to my friends. I listen to my children, and I think that's the thing. Because half the time we make the mistake of wanting to offer advice and help without listening. And I think listening is very important in the sense that then you get to hear where other people come from.
Yeah.
And we don't do enough listening. We don't do enough listening to our friends. We don't do enough listening to our children. There's a lot of help out there, but it's not a one-size-fits-all. There are different components, different types of help. And until you go out there and actually look at what, I mean, I was with a group of friends over the weekend. Their spirituality is different because they're highly religious people. And they talk about how prayer opens their world. But prayer is exactly like meditation. Yeah, you get to be in a space where you're in your head, you're out of your head. You talk to a higher being, even though you can't point to the higher being. And I think that we need to start creating different spaces where we are able to sit in and listen, because therein we find ourselves in the listening. because you listen to other voices, you listen to other ideas, not necessarily ideas that you have or that you've never thought of. You know, whether it is going to sit down with a Mothomang or, you know, go through a counseling session, or sitting with people who are like-minded or even not even like-minded, where they come from a completely different background from yours, or a different way of thinking, and just listening, because therein, in the listening, you're able to hear different opinions. Yeah. And I think it starts with that. For me personally, that's what I've done. I expose myself to 1,000,001 different types of thinking. And I find pockets of myself in those, or things that I'm comfortable with doing or comfortable with pursuing. I've tried other things, they didn't work, and I throw them out. Whatever doesn't work, I throw out, I never look back, and I move on to the next one until I find something that's comfortable for myself.
Yeah. Thank you so much for so openly sharing. It's always a pleasure, and I'm glad that you finally agreed, because I so enjoy your journey and your openness and just allowing yourself to be vulnerable to the extent you have. And thank you for talking about your mom. It's very recent, I'm aware, but that's actually part of who you are. So I think we're planning the next one. And I hope you will probably be the next one who interviews one of the much bigger circle. And I think the next generation should take this conversation forward. So once again, Sedibeng, thank you so much. This is the beginning. I think we should get into these difficult situations and discussions and not be afraid to tackle them. We owe it to ourselves, we owe it to our parents, but I think we owe it most importantly to the next generation. And if we don't prepare and engage them, then we'll be doomed in one way or the other. So thank you very much.
No, thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes. No.
Looking forward to more.
Yes. So just to use the final time is, we're hoping to do this every month. And I think the way to do this is actually invite people to suggest topics, because this is meant to be a platform for topical things. I have so many other things that we keep, when we, there's a sadness or something, we keep saying, we must talk about this. I think this platform and many others should start the journey to engaging each other and to sharing lessons and all of these things about how do we deal with the social isolation of living the suburban life, living the fast-paced life, living this highly fast life that doesn't give us opportunities to do what it is you say you do, to just be still, to just be still. Because in being still, then you hear voices that are quiet, and you're able to listen and all of those. So thank you very much, everybody, and thank you so much for listening. And we will see you soon. We will put notices out on Facebook and the channels and all of them. So thank you. Thank you very much, Sedibeng.
Thank you.